I would just say to people not to make themselves wrong for however they're reacting. If they're reacting with panic, if that's what's coming up for them, that's just your system trying to take care of you in the only way it knows how. Don't resent anything that you experience within yourself. Accept it all. Allow it to be there. Give it some space. And, play if you can. Play with your spouse, play with your kids, play with your friends on the internet. Play is such an important part of our lives, much more important than we realize. Sing, listen to music, put music on and dance yourself crazy and sing along and do karaoke in your home. But bang on drums, Don't hang out with this virus all the time. Be alive in the context that you exist in right now.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Gabor Maté, the renowned speaker, physician, and author. You are best known for your expertise on addiction, stress, childhood trauma, and the mind-body connection. Your work reframes how we view all human development. During this coronavirus global lockdown, you're providing guidance on how people can cope with isolation, raise emotional awareness, and find opportunities for growth. Your work helping me process my own trauma is featured in London Real's 5th documentary feature film, Reconnect, which of course is free to watch at reconnectmovie.com and our website. Gabor, welcome back to London Real.
Nice to be back, even if at a distance.
I know, it's strange, but it's always great to see you. And again, thank you for making your second appearance in our films. We kind of rope you into them, but you played a big role in Iron Mind and a big role in Reconnect. So thanks for being a part of that. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
One of the lines that you say in Reconnect is, you say, you're in this studio and you say, Brian, we live in a highly traumatized society. And so I'm wondering, now that this happens, what do you see when you look out on the world the last couple months?
Well, it's interesting. I've been following some of the guests that you've had on in the last few weeks. And there's a Buddhist saying that goes that when a pickpocket sees a Buddha, all he sees is a wallet, And what that means is that what we see depends so much on where we're coming from. So when you have people like Alex Jones and David, is it Ike or Ike?
Ike, yes.
Ike, okay. When you're conspiracy theorists, COVID happens, what you're going to see is conspiracy. That's just how it works. Now, when you look at, same is true for me. So when you're very conscious of trauma, and so much of my work with mental and physical health has to do with the impact of trauma, when I look at COVID, of course, I'm looking at it through the lens of trauma. And so when we look at what's happening in society, for example, in England, the first 10 doctors to die of COVID were Black, Asian, what's the word, BEMA, B-E-M-A. It was Black, Asian, something else. In the United States, in the Black communities, people are dying disproportionately. Like the number of people dying in the Black communities is disproportionately higher than in the Caucasian communities. So, why is that? It's because these people are already more traumatized before the COVID comes along, so their immune system is less resistant. So what I'm saying about the COVID crisis is that it's kind of revealing certain aspects of our society that were always there, but we don't pay attention to them so much. So social isolation for me, living in my middle-class home in Vancouver, British Columbia, fairly big house, nice neighborhood. I get to go outside. I get to do my bicycle rides. I don't get to go swimming, but I get to do my bicycle ride. That's very different than from somebody living in the downtown east side of Vancouver, where the city in which I live, which is the addicted area, where people are living in one-room occupancy hotels, where in order to get their drugs, they have to go out into the street. So social isolation for them is a very different proposition than it is for me. So this crisis is revealing the traumatic fault lines in our society. And
Wow.
if you look at something like Italy, where something like 89 or 90% of the people, or 99% of the people who died had pre-existing medical conditions. Well, who are the people that have pre-existing medical conditions? They're the people that are most under stress throughout their lives. So who lives and who dies? Now, I know the virus doesn't discriminate. It'll strike anybody at whatever class or whatever economic, whatever social level, but disproportionately, it's going to select the most traumatized to victimize. So that's what I'm seeing. Now, also what I'm seeing is that I think in England, but certainly in North America, the phone calls to mental health lines are going up. Domestic violence has gone up. Anxiety, depression has gone up. Well, what's happening is that the usual ways that we can distract ourselves from our traumas are less available to us. Therefore, those traumas are more likely to show up. So that, when somebody can go to work or go to the pub or meet with their friends or buy a new pair of shoes or watch the latest Manchester Derby or the rugby team, or in the States, the baseball season or the hockey season, we have ways of distracting ourselves from our internal troubles. But now that's all coming to high relief. So I see all that when I look at what's going on. That's not all I see, by the way, but I see all that.
And there's a lot of points you bring in here. When we are, finding that we can't normally deal with the traumas we have or the stresses and anxieties we have, and instead they're kind of magnified or they're at home. I mean, is that a great opportunity to try to recognize them, or is it also a great opportunity for them to take over your life and cause more damage?
Well, I mean, I think that's the key question, and I think that has to do with how we relate to it. And we can see this as an opportunity to really get to know what's in us that usually we can escape from, and to deal with it in a creative and positive fashion, or it can crush us. So that's very much, there's very much an opportunity here, not just for individuals, but the whole of society. And the question is, what are we going to do with this opportunity? Like, take one on a social level, take one example. Isn't it clear to us now that we're all connected and that the whole world is really one unit? And you can't separate nature from society, because it's going to come and bite us if we try and do that. But that so much of human life is what happens in one country is going to affect what happens all over the world. Well, isn't that the clear lesson? But the question is, when is that not the case? When has it ever not been the case? Well, it's the same with individual problems. When has it not been the case that I've had anger or frustration inside me? But now I have less means of getting away from it. So it is an opportunity to recognize the truth about the world and about ourselves. The question is, will we seize the opportunity, or will we, as soon as this is over, go back to escape from reality and just have a big party. It's over. Now we can go back to what it was before.
Yeah, I think there's people out there, Gabor, that would still struggle to see the observation you made, that we're all connected and completely linked with nature and a consequence of our choices of how we've decided to interact with nature. I think still some people would miss that point even now, even though it seems obvious.
Yes, and there are people that will not see that, although it's almost hard to avoid it because it's hitting us in the face every day, you know. But it is an opportunity to learn it. That's all. You know, some people will not learn it. The question is, how many of us will, and what will we do with that knowledge? It's the same with what we can learn about ourselves. Will we take this opportunity to really look at ourselves, or will we try and somehow skim through it and then forget all about it when it's over?
Yeah. It's been interesting to just try to check my own awareness of my own self, you know, because a lot of people maybe are watching this right now and thinking, yeah, I'm feeling this extra anxiety or stress, and I can tell that I'm not taking it out in healthy ways. Maybe I'm drinking more, or eating the wrong things, or getting into more arguments. But for a lot of people, it's not obvious how to be aware and then how to take steps to where it doesn't end up in a destructive way. For example, like I've had a very stressful week, and you know, I had a couple stressful moments the last couple days, and I've known, Gabor, that I need to get out and go for my run, or go do some burpees, or go do some breath work. Whereas honestly, 20 years ago, it would have been, let's go have a bunch of drinks, you know? And so it's taken me a long time to even be able to watch myself and say, okay, that's not how we deal with this situation. And thank God, because otherwise I would go down in a worse hole and I would magnify things. But how can people get that a bit of awareness and then also be able to make a different choice as opposed to one that becomes destructive?
Well, you know, I watched a bit of your video where you were jogging out, or just finished jogging outside some lake, some park in London. And then you're recalling your alcoholic years. And I think you said there was 30 years where every day you drank, every day. Did you say it was 30 years?
Yeah, it was basically, yeah. Yeah.
What made you, I just wonder, I'm answering your question, but I'm asking a question by way of answering your question. What made you recollect that now, just at this moment? And what made you go back to that and talk about it?
Well, I think you're watching the video. I think I recorded that video on like right on January 1st, and I think I just released it. My guys released it again, but it was recent. It was 2 months ago. The reason I recorded that is because I think that was me 2 years sober.
Oh, so that was actually, okay.
Yeah, but I had never really talked about it, and I don't think I had that clarity around it without a bit of separation, you know. But one of the things I said in there is that, you know, I'm supposed to be a smart guy. I'm supposed to understand all these things. I'm around smart people. I was educated well, and yet I couldn't see my own failings for 30 years of going for a destructive habit that was hurting me, and yet I kept going to that repeatedly. It wasn't for 1 year or 3 years or 10 years. It was like 30 years. And that was the most shocking thing for me to realize, and also to be so grateful that I got out of that loop. But I know this is a lot of your life's work is watching people in these situations.
No, but that's exactly what I'm getting at, is that at some point you decided that that pattern was hurting you. And you
Yes.
said that's the end of it. And you didn't go to any particular program. You just said, it's hurting me. I don't want to do that anymore. So in answer to your question about what it takes for people to learn from the present situation, they have to get that their ordinary responses are hurting them. They have to just ask themselves, is how I'm relating to this whole thing? The upset, the stress, the anxiety, the irritation, how I might take it out on people in my neighborhood or sorry, in my environment, including say my children or my spouse, or, you know, is that working for me or is that hurting me? So I think people have to get to that point where they get that their usual responses, and this is not an all or nothing thing. Like my wife and I are married over 50 years now, but you know, we've had our stresses in the last few days, just because, you know, we are not in contact with anybody else really, in any close sense. So that really reveals the tensions in the relationship. Now, this morning we actually sat down and just said, let's just look at each other. Let's just see the other person. Let's just see ourselves reflected in the eyes of the other person. Because we realized that just our tensions, they were hurting us. They weren't working. So you have to get to the point where you're in touch that it doesn't work. Now you also have to have a sense of a different possibility. It's one thing to say it doesn't work, but it's another thing, but there's nothing else I can do. So I think this takes a lot of self-observation, and it takes the willingness to observe yourself, which ordinarily in our society and our culture, we're so distracted from. I mean, the whole world is created to distract ourselves from ourselves. And now that's not available to us so much.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's like that's most of that's been taken away from us, except the internet. You know, imagine all this without the internet. That would be an exercise in human behavior.
Well, the internet is a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, aren't you just grateful for it? I mean, this conversation, we can have conversations with loved ones that you can have from across the world or in the city, but you can't see them. That's great. But on the other hand, the average person, if I would ask them this question, in order to get the information that you need to help you cope with the COVID crisis, how much time do you have to spend on the internet? How much news do you have to watch? 5 minutes a day? In 5 minutes a day, you can get all the information that you need to get through the next day. And the next day you can check the, you know, how much time are you actually spending obsessing about it, watching this talk show, that talk show, this expert, that expert, reading the news, obsessively following the broadcasts and the podcasts. Like, how much of your mind are you filling up? And what I'm saying is that even people are using the COVID crisis to distract themselves from the COVID crisis. In other words, they're using all the news feed and all the information to distract themselves from how they actually feel about what's going on. So everything is up for questioning, I think.
Do you advise people to have some type of a practice where they just spend some quiet time with themselves? I mean, is the solution just that obvious when you want to start?
So I have a yoga practice where I spend time by myself, you know, and I let it go for about a week. I just didn't do it. And then I was noticing myself getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And then yesterday I did it. And all of a sudden, it's not like great dollops of joy really appeared for me, but I felt like a different person. I was in a different relationship with myself. Now, you know, people talk about going to the caves and meditating for 40 years, or monks in monasteries meditating and isolating themselves. Human beings have been doing this for eons for a good reason, you know. And so in a certain sense, the COVID has kind of given us all a massive opportunity to have a silent retreat, a private retreat, all in our own homes. Yeah, I advise people to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it takes. Just hang out with themselves and allow themselves to experience whatever they're experiencing. If it's anxiety, allow yourself to experience the anxiety. If it's fear, allow yourself to examine the fear. If it's anger, let that be there, but observe it and be with it. I do advise that as a good practice. I mean, there's lots of other great practices I think people could engage in, but that certainly is one of them.
And what about relationships with loved ones and then children as well that are new, you know, these new 24-hour relationships that people aren't used to? I mean, I guess you can observe those. You mentioned what you did with your wife, but what are some things people can do?
Well, I've had different responses to that as well. I mean, I've certainly heard about people with young kids, and I know you have young children, who are finding it really tough to be at home alone with the kids full time. Those kids are not meant to be sequestered in a home. They're meant to be out there playing in the fields and the forests and running around and all that. So I mean, yeah, that's hard. Some people, if they're blessed with a big backyard, that's great, but not everybody is. A lot of people are up against it. On the other hand, I've also heard parents say that now that they're not going to work and the kids are not going to school, they're actually appreciating aspects of the relationship with their kids. There's a kind of sense of closeness that they're able to experience they didn't even realize they were missing before, because the absence of not seeing kids the whole day felt so normal. And now that they're with them, they're deepening their relationships. So I think it can go both ways.
Yeah.
I read recently, I'm not sure exactly where, but they looked at the London Blitz when London was being bombed by the Luftwaffe in the Second World War. And some kids were evacuated to the countryside, away from their parents. And other kids stayed at home with their parents through the bombing, through the sirens, through the lockdown, really, through the wreckage. The kids who stayed with the parents did better than the ones that were separated from them, despite the fact that the ones that went to the countryside did not face the bombing raids and the sirens anywhere to the same degree. So it is possible through crisis to connect with your kids in a deeper way, and that helps them.
So what does that tell you? That emotional connection is more important than the physical safety, or that emotional connection with loved ones, in this case, trumped that fear of your life? Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, there's you may have had him on, I don't know if not, Stephen Porges, who the polyvagal theory. He's a neuroscientist and a psychologist, and he says that safety doesn't come from lack of a threat; it comes from connection. Just what you just said, actually. That's why I thought you might have met him, because he frames it exactly the same. He frames it exactly the same way.
So safety doesn't come from lack of a threat; it comes from connection.
Yeah,
that's wild. So I've had both with my boys. I've always had a lot of respect for my wife, but it's gone to stratospheric levels because, I mean, these guys are almost 3 and 4, and they are nonstop. I mean, it's like every 5 minutes, there's a potential like broken bone. There's either laughter or crying, or it's like it's on all the time with these boys. But at the same time, I've also had like my son Caden like do things he's not done to me like before. Like he'll come give me a hug, or he'll hold my hand, and I think it's just because I'm around more, and that's been beautiful to recognize, and something I always knew. Like kids know how much time you log with them. They might as well have a punch card, because they know. I've seen it before with my stepdaughter. Like when you log the time, then you get it. If you don't log the time, you don't get it. And presents don't make a difference, and nothing makes a difference. Like they seem to have that inherent feeling, whether you're there for them or not.
Yeah, and so it is an opportunity to deepen a relationship with your kids. Those of you that have small kids at home. Both ways. I mean, there's a cartoon in the New Yorker, a comic strip in the New Yorker just this week, with this mom sitting in the bathroom, and the kid is knocking on the door, and the mother's saying, "Can I just have 2 minutes to pee?" You know? So I'm sure a lot of parents are up against it in that sense. And then there's the other side of, okay, look, here's an opportunity to really get closer to your kids. Just let them lead it. Let them be the guidance. You know, like if they're not a disturbance to you, if they're not a interruption of your life, but they are your life, then that changes the whole relationship.
And what about the fear that's around us? Because fear in a weird way is an important tool right now, and it's being used as a tool to get people to maintain this distance, which can potentially save their lives and maybe many more lives. So it's a strange scenario where we're using this emotion as a social distancing tool. At least that's the way I see it. And so, but sometimes it feels like it's almost too much fear in order to get the compliance you wouldn't normally get. And I feel like, first of all, that's something to notice. And there's also a collateral damage effect maybe on the other side, when it's like, okay, it's time for no one to be scared anymore. Let's get back to normal. And there's this maybe a fear hangover. I don't know. I wonder if you see something there.
Yeah, well, I relate to that because on the one hand, we have a pandemic. On the other hand, we also have a panicdemic where the level of people's fear is severe. And so and there's a difference between fear and anxiety or panic. Fear is just a rational response to a threat. And I think it's going to take some time, and only in retrospect are going to be able to look back and say, was our response actually rational? Did we have to go to the degree that we did? Did we overdo it? Did we underdo it? I mean, these questions I don't think will be answered until there's a retrospective possibility of evaluating what happened here. And I have some questions about it.
Yeah.
Questions about it. But at the same time, my rule is to obey the rules at the moment. That's the only thing that's socially responsible as far as I'm concerned. So, but no matter who looks at it, and no matter what you think the source of this is, there's a genuine threat. I've known people with the disease, they had a very severe time of it. And of course, we all know the death numbers that are going up or still happening in large numbers. That's a genuine threat. Then there is the degree of panic and fear that we experience around it. And I don't think the two are necessarily the same. In other words, we can recognize the threat and have an authentic fear response of, okay, given that threat, what do we need to protect ourselves? Then there's the anxiety and the fear and the panic that I'm experiencing all the time. That has nothing to do with any immediate threat. I'm just experiencing it. And the two are not the same thing. And so you can have a genuine fear, or you can have anxiety and panic and terror. And I would argue that if you have the second response, it's got nothing to do with the actual threat. Now, I'm not sure if your question implied that you think that the authorities are using this fear as a tool. Is that what they're doing? Or are they simply saying, people, here's how it is. If you do such and such, the consequences will be such and such. So we don't want you to do that. What is your sense?
I don't know what I'm saying. I guess I said it right there. I mean, they did a survey here, Gabor, and 9 out of 10 people in the UK were favored an extended lockdown. And that just surprised me, because I thought everybody would be looking to get out or get back to work or something. And so, I mean, maybe this is just the world I'm in, but it just felt very extreme, and it felt like people were too scared. And then I look at the numbers and the estimates, and they're coming down, and I don't want to marginalize this, but I just thought, this is a tool that's been used super effective. You've had a compliance rate that no one expected happening. But then I also don't see people wanting to come out of their caves. I feel like, and it just felt like maybe it was overdone.
Well, and I think that's a good question. And I think we'll look back afterwards and see, was it really overdone? But, I have a friend who lives in a Gulf island here in British Columbia, an island off the mainland, the coast of British Columbia. And he says he can't go for a walk outside without a mask, without fear of being lynched by his neighbors, Well, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, going on a walk in the fresh air by yourself on a Gulf island, you're not going to infect anybody, So I think that's overwrought fear. The the statistic you gave me about 9 out of 10 think there should be an extended lockdown. I don't think there should be an extended lockdown. I mean, I'll go along with the, you know, I'll accept the necessity of the lockdown as long as there's scientific evidence for it. But why are people already saying that there should be an extended lockdown? That's not based on science yet, because you don't know the science yet. That's based on fear.
Yeah.
Now, whether that fear is created by authorities or whether we live in a society where fear is sort of a natural part of people's emotional makeup, I rather think it goes both ways. Now, take something like the war, the Iraq war. So people were made to be afraid of the weapons of mass destruction that never existed. But governments, both in the UK, blessed Tony Blair, and George Bush in the States, were adamant in telling everybody about these non-existent weapons of mass destruction, for which there was no proof to start with. So it's not that I don't think politicians are capable of manufacturing fear in order to manipulate people into certain behaviors, in that case, supporting a war that had no justification. But that doesn't mean that it's happening all the time. You know, sometimes stuff happens and people have genuine reason to be afraid. I happen to think this is one of those times, and I'm not sure that anybody's using it. I think, again, I have questions. Like, you know, Sweden is not using the same degree of lockdown by any means that we are. Now, still, they're running an experiment over there. We're running an experiment over there. Time will tell which experiment is true. But I'm not sure that deliberate fear-mongering is really a part of it. I do think that people are overly afraid, but I think that's their own stuff coming up.
Yeah. And you're saying there's a difference that you should make in your mind between the fear and then the anxiety and stress that comes with it. And you should say that they're not related necessarily. And if you have that, they're not.
No, in fact, what I'm thinking is that the people who have an exaggerated fear response, that goes back to their trauma. In other words, they live in a world where they just perceive themselves as under threat, and that any genuine threat will only exacerbate their innate sense of threat, terror, anxiety. It doesn't cause it, it'll exacerbate it, it'll trigger it. And I think that's happening in a big way right now.
So that's powerful. If someone's listening to that and they're feeling that, then they should know it's not because of what you're expecting to happen. It's because of what you're bringing to the table through your own trauma. And that's going to bring up the stress and anxiety, and the fear is just something any human would respond to this specific threat.
Yeah. Now, having said that, do people have genuine concerns? Sure. Yeah. A lot of people must be worried about their jobs right now. There must be a lot of small businesses. I walked down the street nearby where we live. All the stores are shuttered. Well, just how much staying power do they have? What margins are they working with? Will they be able to rehire their employees, or as many employees as they had? Will they be able to reopen it all? There's all kinds of genuine reasons why people have fear right now, not just of the infection itself, but of the impact of our response to the infection. So it's a difficult matter to figure out what is real fear and what is innate anxiety. But I would say that in response to a genuine fear, we can just rationally strategize. Whereas the other kind of fear overwhelms us and we're just at the effect of it.
You mentioned the fact that, you know, you're worried about walking outside because of what would happen to you from your peers. You know,
well, I'm sorry, it wasn't me. This wasn't me. This is a friend of mine.
Yeah, but I mean, like this is real now. Like the judgment of others and our judgment of other people. Like, how do we try to negotiate that process, and how do we deal with it when it's happening to us or we're doing it to other people without knowing it? Because that can get real and even more oppressive than a lockdown.
I've seen discussions of people who go shopping and how do they handle when somebody comes close to them. So do you get upset? Do you yell at them? Do you calmly say, look, I'm sorry, I'm maintaining social distance. Please respect that, you know? So there's all kinds of opportunity here to learn how to be with other people under situations of stress and tension.
How much does that lack of physical contact, how much is that hurting us?
Yeah, well, I think that's hurting us a lot. See, physical contact, human beings are wired to attach, to connect with other people. There's a reason for that. In fact, we evolved. For all that, we talk about rugged individualism here in the West, especially in North America. Human beings would never have evolved as rugged individualists. We wouldn't have lasted a minute. So from the evolutionary point of view, and I've just been studying this in writing my new book, human beings, mammals, or homonyms, or human-like creatures appeared on the earth, I think, something like 2 million years ago. Our present species, Homo sapiens, I think we arrived on the scene maybe around 200,000 years ago. From those 2 million years and those 200,000 years until about 10,000 years ago, we lived in small band hunter-gatherer groups. We wandered in the outdoors in a purposeful fashion with a small group of people that we're absolutely connected to. And all the children were parented by all the adults. And everybody was in relationship to everybody else. And physical touch was a big part of it. So we're wired to attach. And the mechanisms of attachment include physical touch. In fact, for babies, that's the only thing that's available. So when a baby cries, they want to be picked up because they want that physical touch. As we get older, we develop other ways of attaching. We can be important to each other. We can copy each other and be attached that way. We can share our intimate feelings with each other. We can hold somebody's image in our hearts and love them even if we don't see them for a long time. But the most fundamental, the most rudimentary, and the most basic way of attaching is still the physical touch. So we're missing that in a big way now. So grandchildren are missing the touch of their grandparents now. And especially it's hard, Brian, for people who are living alone, who are not partnered, who are not in a relationship. And,
Yes.
and who can't go out there and hug their friends and shake hands and so on. This is a tough time for people.
Yeah. And they probably don't realize how much that's adding up and, changing them. I mean, for me and my boys, like, I don't know how to communicate with them without touching them. Like, that's my default. I'm grabbing them, I'm messing with them, I'm picking them up. And when I touch them when they're sleeping at night, and in the morning, if they're, that's my default. So, and I'm lucky to have that, grab time, snuggle time stuff with them, because I think it charges me up more so than I ever realized before.
I think what I'm hearing here and what I'm getting is that this is really an opportunity for us to get in touch with our humanity, with a very vulnerable humanity. Most of the time we can escape from our vulnerability. Now it's a lot harder. And that same vulnerability can make us a lot more open as well. So you're grabbing your kids and you're hugging your kids, well, that's showing your need for contact, and that's vulnerable, Yeah. And it also makes you more open.
I've never felt so grateful and so connected as now. I know that sounds so strange, but maybe it doesn't sound strange. I bet people felt that way during the Second World War in difficult scenarios. Even troops, maybe they've felt the same way, somehow connected to each other in a way they never felt in civilian life.
Oh, I think that's a common theme of people. I mean, it's interesting. My father, we're Jewish, as you know, and my father in Hungary was in a forced labor battalion. So the Jews couldn't serve in the army as sort of second-class citizens, but they'd had to serve the country by joining these forced labor battalions, which means that they were not armed, but they had to dig ditches, they had to build fortifications, haul material, whatever, under very severe conditions, under conditions where they could be severely punished or even killed if they did the wrong thing. So my father was in a forced labor battalion for over a year during the last years of the war. And what always surprised me is that we talked about those times with a lot of affection, precisely for the same reason that you just mentioned, because the camaraderie and the closeness, the sense of being together and sharing the same fate, and of supporting one another, and of enduring something in the companionship of other human beings, was an extraordinarily valuable experience and a formative root experience in his life. And that's why he was capable of forgetting the fear and the terror and all that they all experienced at the same time.
Like kind of like the Blitz, like you said, maybe that closeness trumps the terror,
No, the difference was that they were physically together.
Right.
And this one, we've never been so alone together. I mean, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
We're together in it all, but we're all alone in that togetherness.
It's so strange that way. Yeah, I've felt really connected to the people I am around now, which is very few, but it's been very revealing to see who is there and who is there for you. And we got a skeleton crew here, and they, some people have been absolutely amazing, and it's been, really powerful to be around the people that are there for you in this time,
And also the human creativity that emerges at such a time.
Yeah.
Those wonderful videos of the Italians serenading each other from their balconies, various symphony orchestras, everybody at home, but they're all playing the same music, like Ravel's Bolero, or musicians from around the world making music at the same time, synchronously on video. Or people joining meditation groups online, or yoga groups online, or whatever groups online. So it's also a time for the burgeoning of tremendous creativity and inventiveness that we're seeing.
Do you think we'll come out of this with some type of memory that will, are you hopeful that we might, learn something from this and change our ways, Gabor?
Well, it's an opportunity to do that. Whether we will or not, I don't know. I mean, if something like the Holocaust could happen, and people still didn't learn that you can't treat other people like they were non-humans, then when will we have learned it? If 40 million or 45 million people died in two major world wars, fought largely in Europe, we haven't learned that wars are evil and destructive. When will we have learned it? But if you look at where Britain and the States spend, particularly the States, spend much of their money, it's on the military. If we haven't learned yet that racism, if we haven't learned from slavery and from all kinds of experiences, and from the extermination of the Aboriginal people in North America, we haven't yet learned that racism just brings suffering on everybody. When will we have learned it? So when you ask me, will we learn these lessons? I think in every one of these experiences, there's an opportunity for learning, but whether we learn it or not, I can't predict. And I think some people will and some people won't. And it's also a question afterwards as to who gets to draw the lessons and who gets to prescribe what the lessons are. Because we do live in a society where some people have a lot more power to influence other people. So it's also a question of what will the people of influence have learned? Or what will they want to have learned that they will impose on the rest of us? So there's, and how capable are we as individuals to think for ourselves so that we're not simply under the effect of the cultural propaganda or the influence machine or the media. To what extent can we think for ourselves and draw our own conclusions from our own experience? I don't have answers to that, Brian. I rather suspect and fear that the important lessons will not have been learned because we're not geared to learn them. But maybe I'm wrong, and I do think the opportunity is here for learning deeply.
Yeah, so do I. I can't think of anyone that, say, 6 months from now, they, get to go to a restaurant or a sporting event or get to take a plane to some beach that a little part of them doesn't think, wow, this is amazing that we can do this,
Yeah. Well, if you're talking about gratitude, that would be a great lesson, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Be grateful for when we have something, when we have it, instead of, and think about the other lessons, like so many things that were so important 3 months ago, all of a sudden don't seem so important. Like, which movie star is sleeping with which movie star? How important was that in the first place? or for that matter, whether Liverpool does win the British Football Championship, which by default they looks like they have, but whether they formally do or not, how important is that really? On the other hand, can we just enjoy it? Can we go back to enjoying these things without attaching such importance to them? So there's a lot of lessons here to be learned, and maybe gratitude is one of them. That, yeah, look how easily it's all lost. Let's be grateful for it when we have it.
Yeah. I saw some meme going around that saying we used to look up to our movie stars and basketball players and football players, and now we look up to our, nurses and truck drivers and people that serve us food. Those are like the heroes.
Yeah, well, that would be quite a switch, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I read a study some years ago now. They looked at the diaries of young girls 50, 60 years ago, maybe 60, 70 years ago now. And who they wanted to be were nurses and scientists and explorers. Their mentor or their models were the ones who really made a contribution to the world. And much more recently, their models were the pop heroes, the pop star, the pop culture heroes. Well, maybe we can go back to that. Maybe we can go back to emulating and taking as our models those that really make a difference in the world. And yeah, that's not the movie star. That's the truck driver. That's the person who stacks the shelves of the grocery store. That's the orderly who cleans up the shit in the hospitals. That's the nurse who goes to work every day. Maybe that'll shift. Maybe we won't forget that. If we learn nothing else, that alone would be a great learning.
How much of us are going through stages of grief right now? I mean, I had a guest on, I think last week, that said we're all kind of going through the 5 stages of grief. And I've caught myself a couple times, I'll be honest, Gabor, where I have this kind of bleak, depressed feeling, which isn't normal for me. And I'll have to just catch myself and admit to myself that I'm going through an emotional processing here that I'm not cognizant of, I'm not in control of, which of course is rare for me to believe that, to be like, okay, wow, there's things I'm dealing with. Or I'll walk outside right now and there's just no one around. It's like planet Mars. And and for a couple weeks I can be like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. But then after a while, it comes to a point where it's like a bad episode on Star Trek, and it kind of gets to me. Are a lot of us going through different versions of that right now, and is that just another way of being aware of that?
Well, I've been through the same thing. I've had the same heaviness, this sense of depression. It's not every day, and it was more a few weeks ago than I'm experiencing it now, but it does come and go. And I think it is an aspect of grief. And we're just grieving. And it's interesting with the 5 stages, like the bargaining and denial and bargaining, and anger,
acceptance, yeah.
And then finally acceptance. But there's somebody, I heard a British physician actually with lung cancer that went to her brain, a beautiful YouTube talk about grief. And she said, none of those 5 stages actually talk about grief itself. Like denial is not grief, acceptance is not grief. Grief is grief.
Right.
Grief is precisely these waves of heaviness.
Yeah.
That we go through. So that's actual grief. And we're grieving what we've lost. We may be grieving aspects of ourselves, but we're grieving. And yeah, and when that comes, all we can do is accept that it's there. Just as in the grief over a lost one, you just have to accept that this is what I'm going through right now.
Yeah.
So
right?
that heaviness that you mentioned, my guess is that most people watching this will have experienced the same thing. I certainly have.
Yeah, and I've spoken with some people on video calls, and people that in their normal day-to-day lives, they can't exhibit that because they're leaders, and so they're not used to doing that. And I'm the same way. Like when I'm at home with my family or my boys or my wife or my daughter, or I'm here, or I'm on camera, I can't be lamenting about how bad my life is or my day is. But I remember the first time I got a text and saw the first figures of estimates of the dead in America, and it just hit me really hard. And I just wasn't used to that feeling, Gabor. I was like, because I'm the one that's supposed to be optimistic and tell everyone that there is a solution and we're going to find a way. But it took me a while to process it, 30, 40 minutes, and I was like, whoa. And then it happened a couple more times, like you said, about maybe 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. And I guess that makes sense, right? Because I am grieving things, loss.
Yeah, although what also comes up for me when I hear you relate what you just did, is that maybe it's a part of yourself you're grieving for. Like maybe you're grieving that part that's supposed to be always okay, that's supposed to be always on top of it, that's supposed to make everything okay. And maybe there's a realization that I can't, and you can't, and nobody can. And maybe we're grieving that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Grieving the fact that we can't always be okay. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Although there's something nice about talking about it. I had the same conversation with, Grant Cardone, who flies around the world in his $50 million jet. And he's like, yeah, Brian, I had some hard times like that too, where I'm, normally he's the guy that's always being the guy. And he's like, I had some hard times where I'm just trying to process this stuff. And there's something nice about that too, maybe also being able to be human and, be multidimensional, where maybe you don't allow yourself to be all the time. So,
well, I have to say, now that I think of it, that's a big change. I think that I've seen a lot more people being vulnerable and open about their feelings than I ever have over this. And I think if that alone, what if just that changes? What if we can all be just more real together as we move forward after this is over? That alone would be a huge and very healthy shift.
Yeah, I see glimpses of that. I remember when they in Washington D.C. when they passed the original stimulus package, that somebody commented, maybe it was Trump. He said, "And we got along with the Democrats, and this happened really fast, and we all got along and got something done for the good of the country." And it was like, It's like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. But it was interesting to see them have these realizations. And I've even seen, Trump have flashes of reality and emotion and, those kinds of things too, which is nice to see that side. He's, awestruck by the heroes in the hospital in Queens where he grew up, how they go in on the front lines every day. He won't stop talking about how they're heroes and they're putting on their scrubs, like going to war. And it is nice to see people showing more vulnerability.
Now, the other aspect of what you just said was, and this is more a political social discussion, but in the States particularly, but also in England, I read reports that estimated that in England, prior to the COVID crisis, now I'm looking at the last couple of decades, between 10 and 120,000 people may have died because of austerity, particularly in the healthcare system. Okay, and as far as the dysfunction of the American, now I don't know if those figures are accurate and they're being disputed, but nobody's disputing that people have died as a result of austerity. Now, all of a sudden, in the States as well, they couldn't have a national health system, and it's impossible. Overnight, they find trillions of dollars. Where were those trillions of dollars before? They were always around. Why couldn't they have it made a priority to improve the health of their population, everybody in that population, so that when people lose their jobs, they don't lose their health care? They didn't have the money before. Well, how come they have the money now to expand on easing people's suffering? So there's a lot of questions, I think, that the present situation should cause us to ask about the usual assumptions that we make about social policy, for example, and the degree to which the whole liberal ethic of the neoliberal ethic of government bad, private industry good, and we need to cut back on social programs. Really? What has the present situation taught us? Is that governments have a huge role to play to step in there and support their people. Otherwise, the world just goes down a sinkhole. And the money is there. It didn't all of a sudden materialize. So there's a lot of, I'd rather suspect that politically, economically, you and I might not be exactly on the same side of the fence. But all I'm saying is that the present situation does raise a lot of questions about the usual assumptions that we make about how to run a society.
Yeah, it does. It's like a question of priority is what that is. And when the priorities change, you can see how the resources are there. So then we have to ask ourselves, what are the priorities? And this whole we are all connected is, now it's so blatantly obvious with this virus that, where it should have always been obvious, but these people over here you normally marginalized and didn't care about, if they get sick, we all get sick. Just like if these people over here you ignore and they become angry and they get violent, we all pay for that. These people over here, like, in your work, they are traumatized and then they get addicted. Well, then we all pay for that in some way. And this shows, maybe this shows it in a different way, in a different metaphor somehow to everybody. People in Wuhan go to a wet market and the whole world gets affected, and it's one thing to point the finger, but it's also to realize, we are all in this together.
Yeah. And the spiritual teachers of all faiths have only been saying that for 5,000 years.
Yeah. And all my wisest guests here say that at the end of their shows, Gabor, they all say in so many words, we are all one. The top 25, they do. And I started figuring that out about 4 years into doing this, and I kept hearing it, and I was like, wow, okay, there's some deep level wisdom here. I had a question for you.
And by the way,
yeah,
it's one thing for me to say it. It's another thing for me to live it.
Yeah.
And it's not like It's not like the saying it is the living it. So it's I think these lessons are, very few of us exist who get these lessons once and for all. I think these lessons are daily.
Yeah.
And we have to keep learning them every day. We have to keep coming back to them every day.
Yeah, and peeling back the layers of who we are too, and processing the different traumas and the things that come up on the back of it. And it just, when you think you're fixed, you have that new realization. Yeah, and can you live it every day? Can you live it in all aspects of your life? You know, what you might convince yourself you're living it on this aspect, but then you walk by someone in need, and that's okay. But then you'll convince yourself you're broadcasting in front of millions, so you're giving back. So it's like these are things to ponder. You know, we did we usually do Thanksgiving at our house every year, and last year we decided to cook Thanksgiving for a homeless center here, and so I had real direct contact with homeless people here, and really got down the rabbit hole. And I thought of you when doing that, because dealing with the center, they started educating us on how 80% of them usually had drug addictions, and then some trauma, of course, and then the homeless. It was this trifecta, and a lot of things you talked about as well. And I think of them now, and I know you've spent a lot of time working with them, and now they're super marginalized when all this is happening. What's going on with them now, and what can we do, and what can we not do?
Yeah, well, so I alluded to that earlier, when I was saying that for people that are dependent on their drugs in the downtown east side of Vancouver or equivalent areas of London or wherever people happen to be, this is a very different situation than for those that are middle class and have resources. So they don't have the option of isolating. For example, if you don't buy your heroin and you go and you go to withdrawal, what option do you have to social isolate? You have to go out there and do it. Get your heroin. This is not a choice. Otherwise, you go through horrible physiological, psychological withdrawal. So, what's happening in Vancouver now? All of a sudden, the government has got religion. Well, got religion. They got wisdom. Oh, maybe we should give more of these people prescribed heroin, so they don't have to go out there and deal with the dealers and endanger themselves. But why the heck didn't we do that 20 years ago? The science was available to us 20 years ago, even before. So one of the things I hope that does happen for these people is that we're actually going to look at the irrationality of how we handle the drug problem in our society most of the time. It's always been irrational, but right now the irrationality has become egregiously obvious. So the first thing that should happen is that governments really need to look at their drug policies. And by all means, one of the steps needs to be the provision of safe drugs to people that are dependent on them. That's an obvious first step. And facilities where they can inject under supervision and with clean equipment and so on. So that lesson has been driven home by research for a long time now. But now, at least here in Vancouver, where things are much more open and free that way than in many other places in the world, governments are actually opening to that possibility much more than before. I think the other thing is, it's great that you did the cooking at Thanksgiving, and my guess is probably it was for you. My guess is as happy a Thanksgiving as you've ever had. But we can support the organizations that are working in these areas. So I know here in Vancouver there are institutions, organizations, nonprofits that are continuing to work down there. So now is the time to really give them whatever financial support we can. And I'm sure the same thing is true wherever people happen to live. So it's a time to reach out and say, well, who's doing this work that I can support? And if I can't support it physically, do I have the resources to support them financially?
Yeah, it was super eye-opening because my whole team, we all went down and cooked and served and talked to them all, everybody. And so it was just really eye-opening to find out people's situations, and it's never what you think. And, you know, some people were just with one paycheck away, and then this situation happened, and, you know, you start finding out what's going on, and then what they have to deal with on the streets. And then now with what's going on now, and then there's nobody out on the streets. So then there's no money, and then
Yeah.
it's a reality. And they did that study in Scotland where they were trying to get these places where people can, you know, can inject their drugs, and how, you know, it was safer for everybody and saved all of these costs and all of these A&E costs from the NHS, but still hard time for people to get their heads around something like that. But it's like this with the COVID-19, it almost says, well, here's another reason for you to be more aware of these people, because you're locked down, and yet the people that you are marginalizing are now spreading the disease that's going to affect you. So maybe we should revisit this one more time until we realize that maybe it's the right thing to do. But yeah, I've been thinking about that just because I see it on the streets and see that happening. So yeah, more awareness. How are you doing? I know you've been stretched super thin because you're writing your book, but you've still been super generous about doing some of these, you know, video conversations, which I'm sure completely screw up your writing schedule. So thank you again.
Well, actually, no, you know what? I know when you first asked me a few years ago, I said no, because I was really in a state of anxiety about the book. I was just in a state of writer's block, and I just wasn't getting anywhere. And then when I got a couple of chapters done and felt happy about them, I said, okay, great. No, I love to talk to Brian, you know? So, no, believe me, it's not a generosity. It's a pleasure. Like I'm like everybody else, locked in my house for the most part. And, you know, so it's an opportunity to have contact and to express myself. So I welcome it.
How's the book?
How's the book? Well, I'm having a discussion with my editors on Monday, so I have anxiety about it. I have anxiety that this time I've taken on a topic that's too big for me, that somehow I won't be able to capture it all, or I won't be able to capture it in a way that's interesting or meaningful to people. At the same time, when I read what I've written, I like what I've written. So it's a daily task to overcome my self-doubt and to keep going with it. And like on the one hand, I have this absolute confidence that what I'm writing is important and that I'm the guy to say it. And on the other hand, I'm filled with doubt as to whether am I saying something original, if I'm saying it, or am I saying anything interesting? Am I saying it in a way that is engaging? I had more confidence with my previous books than I have right now, let me tell you. But this is also the biggest topic I've taken on. Illness, you know, the myth of normal, illness and health in an insane culture. I'm looking at the whole society.
Yeah.
And so that's a big one.
I do love the topic, though. It sounds fascinating. So I'm looking forward to having you back over here to talk about it. That's for sure.
It's a great title. And I almost wish I could I have this vision of just publishing the book with the title only. The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane Culture, and have everybody just write their own experience, you know, into the book. Like just put empty pages. But I'm not sure my publisher would go for that.
Maybe you're onto something there. Well, a lot of people will just read the title and the chapters and then just get you to talk about it. So,
yeah.
But what you describe sounds the way I feel when I'm making a movie. But fortunately, I have my director here, Luis, with me, so we take it out on each other. But we have the same feelings. I mean, the last one, Reconnect, it was almost 2 years, start to finish. We put it on the shelf a bunch of times, and to where we both were angry at each other and didn't want to talk to each other for a while because it was just not good enough. And then you go back and forth, same things you struggle with. Is it self-aggrandizing? Is it a point? Does anyone care? Is it engaging? Are we making just another ayahuasca movie? There's 100 of them. You know, is it just too much about me? Does anyone care about your feelings? Is it about the person who's watching? Is it about going to help their life? and on and on and on. So I
And
understand that.
speaking of ayahuasca, you know that the center that you're at, the Soltara, and
Yeah.
that you show in the movie, is closed down now.
Yeah.
So are other places. The Temple of the Way of Light, where I was in Peru last July, it's shut down, and these native people are really suffering because they're so dependent on the trade of Northerners, Westerners coming to employ their services. So this is affecting people in a deep way. People we don't even usually think about as being part of our lives, but they're being affected by it. And some of these centers will struggle to open again after this is over.
Yeah, and not to mention all the healing they could have been doing in the meantime.
Yeah.
And not to mention all of the, I want to call it reverse healing, but all of the things that are being pent up and maybe discovered right now. But yeah, I mean, I've been in touch with Daniel Cleveland down at Soltara, and I think they've got some of the shamans with them there now. But yeah, there's a whole industry, like lots of villages and the Shipibos they would be supporting right now. I know they'll be back, I'm sure. But yeah, it's been a fascinating journey with that whole thing. And again, thanks for being part of that film. And funny enough, the last week I've had reflections back to my ceremonies in 2018 and some of the things that I remember it showing me, and how it took long enough, but how some of them are manifesting. So yeah, that whole process is fascinating. So you're doing this book and one more book, and then you're allowing yourself back to the world.
Well, I won't sequester myself totally, but this book, the one I'm working on now, that's the big one. That's the huge one. The other book is called Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Adult Children and Their Parents. And I'm writing it with my son, who's helping me write this one as well. But that'll be completely co-written about adult kids and their parents. And that'll be easier to write. It's more specific. It's a more circumscribed subject. And, but yeah, once I finish this one, I start writing that one. But that won't keep me from traveling. Right now, I'm not going anywhere. Well, not that I could anyway, but I was scheduled not to go anywhere, just to stay home and write. I did have some speaking events internationally lined up for the fall. At this point, absolutely no guarantee that I'll be going anywhere, or any of us. We don't know yet, do we?
No, it's like the new normal, and we just got to breathe and move through it for sure. Any final thoughts, Gabor, for people that have been watching us? I know a lot of people are locked down. This might be the closest emotional human contact they've had for a while outside their families. But yeah, just anything to close on.
I would just say to people not to make themselves wrong for however they're reacting. If they're reacting with panic, if that's what's coming up for them, that's just your system trying to take care of you in the only way it knows how. So don't resent anything that you experience within yourself. Accept it all. Allow it to be there. Give it some space. And, play if you can. Play with your spouse, play with your kids, play with your friends on the internet. Play is such an important part of our lives. Much more important than we realize. Sing. Listen to music. Put music on and dance yourself crazy and sing along and do karaoke in your home. Bang on drums, just don't hang out with this virus all the time. Be alive as much as you can be in the context that you exist in right now.
Yeah, I had a recent guest that has a line that life is happening for you, not to you. And this could be a break you won't get the rest of your life. This could be the time where you don't have to do anything now, and it could be this weird, wonderful time to do what you want, to explore these different things without having to be accountable to this or that. And again, you focus on what you control. If you can't control certain things, then maybe let it go. And don't judge yourself for your emotions, but be aware of them, and then think about some of the choices you're making. And this could be an amazing period of growth, I think, for a lot of people, or it could be this hellacious nightmare. And yeah, that same guest spent 14 months in a prison cell in California, and for him, yeah, for him, that was actually one of the better times in his life, because he found a way to just find happiness in his isolated situation. So it's been fun for me to listen to his daily lessons for everyone, in the fact that maybe this is a great time to go inside and be with yourself and understand yourself, before the world demands you to be distracted again. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely.
Gabor, as usual, you go deep into me and get me to talk about things I don't talk about with anybody else. Even remote, you did it. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody enjoyed this, we have two other great conversations with Gabor on our site, and the movie Reconnect as well, which you're in. And wishing you all the best. I hope you can get to that pool soon and bust out those laps. I know I miss swimming too. And all the best with the book. I'm super excited to read it and have you back in London sometime, hopefully.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you again in person.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks, Gabor. Much appreciated. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time on London Real.